It's great to be here and give a speech about a topic I have no clue how to talk about, because it should be the relationship between art and money. Now, there is no chance to come to Poznań without remembering Piotr Piotrowski. I don't know if some of you met Piotr Piotrowski. Yes, he was teaching here at the university, one of the greatest art historians in Central and Eastern Europe, and he wrote fantastic books about the history of art in this country, but also in Europe. Now, one thing about this book is fantastic because it gives also an interpretation of what is democracy or what is liberal democracy. And I think that's the big frame in which we would love to discuss the relationship between art and money. Is basically the relationship in a context which we describe as a liberal democracy. Now, what Piotr states is that usually the relationship between funding and the arts was not so much in history in democracies, but in more authoritarian states or with authoritarian partners. He mentions the church, but he mentions the nobilities, he mentions the big regimes we had in Europe throughout history. But a relationship between art and democracy is relatively young, because democracy is young in the history of this continent. Still, there are some points I would love to mention this strange relationship, because it has so many dimensions. And it is from the point of view of the ethics and what is necessary to have it in a way that not the art is conquered by money, is very critical. Because art always, and I would love to mention 4 points here. And the first one for me is the ethical side, because art, or let's say money, always comes with a purpose or with an interest. And it's very interesting to read this book of Piotr Piotrowski, and it says the interest of the nobility was, to get self-perception or self-representation. So art was done for a self-representative purpose. In nowadays, democracy, art, and we know that's the story of art history in the 20th century, art has become free from such purposes. Still, it's dependent on money. So this relationship only works if there is an ethical framework. And I would love to call it the ethical framework of differentiation. Because if those spheres are not differentiated between the sphere of money and the sphere of art, it becomes very strange. And I don't know if you ever have visited a villa of an oligarch who collects art, you might understand what I mean. It looks a bit strange. So if the spheres are not really separated between what is money and what is art, it becomes very strange. And I would love further on to explain exactly what I mean. Now, for the let's say visual arts, markets play a much bigger role than for the performative arts. And markets themselves are something like a power dispositive, because they define a social reality. And this social reality is quite important and powerful, because it sets the dimensions of quality on the one side. On the other side, it defines a specific kind of social role for the arts in the economy. And I think there we have to make the differentiation that the markets is a pure transactional value, whereas the art world has more like, the productive value, which is more a historical one. So if you go contemporary, the transactional value, of course, is the leading one. But if you look from the history side, what Piotr does in his book, it's the historical value which at the end of the day defines the identity of the arts, right? And I think this is very necessary to understand the differentiation between a transactional value and a historical value, because if you mix it up, it gets very dangerous for the artist, because then he's part of the purpose of the transactional value and not of the other one, right? And I think this is a critical moment in the relationship between art markets and art per se, because defining art only by transactional value doesn't lead to a historical context. The third one, I think, what is extremely necessary is when money, art, is coming through public funding, because public funding is a key figure in our societies. Without public funding, probably not very much institutions could survive, theaters, museums, and others, right? But there's one thing where we have to be, where we also have this kind of bias in there, saying that public funding is always coming with in a national context, with a national interest of representation, whereas the art which is presented is always universal. And universal, it is basically the pattern of universal humanity. Now, if in the governance, the public funding side gets too, let's say, too powerful in relation to the identity of the institutions, then we get very provincial, because every decision is done through a national interest. And then art becomes, as we all know and as we all experience, propaganda. So the governance stream, the productive mechanism between a public funding and the dignity of an art institution is critical for the freedom of the arts. If this is not happening, we end up with propaganda on the one side and with intrigues and techniques of power on the other side. So you see in all the dimensions I told you that there must be manufacturing in the relationship between art and money with the right purpose and the right instruments in place. Now, there's another bias of public funding, because you might say, okay, if it's public funding, let's do a democratic decision. But do you really want majority deciding about what is art and what is not art? Probably not. So this needs really designed procedures and processes that public funding serves the purpose of the art, respecting the dignity of the institutions. And finally, there is the private funding in the arts, and this is also hypercritical, because in the private funding of the art, many mistakes are being made. And there's one thing, and I just want to mention it here: if private funding of art is not directed towards a public benefit, it doesn't really exist. It's just the mere personal purpose of personal lobbying or personal vanity or whatever. So even private funded collections or private funded arts needs the public mission in itself in order to display the full power of what art can display, in order also to give you the representative function you might get through investment into the arts. So these are my 4 points. Like it is a field, the field between art and money is a field of ethical differentiation, number one. Number two, if we're talking about markets in the art buying, it is critical to say that that's only a transactional value. But the historical value of art is a different one and is more connected to the fact how art is produced, the ateliers and everything else, right? The third one is the public money coming in, and the public money coming in always has kind of this national representative function if it is not manufactured in a process and in a governance way which respects the dignity of the cultural institution. And the fourth thing is that if there is private investment into the art or private investment in fund, it is extremely necessary that you see that this also is directed towards a public purpose. Otherwise, it's just a living room with some nice pictures of an oligarch somewhere, right? But this is not the real mission of the arts, nor the mission of funding into the arts. Now, I have brought some nice pictures which, for me, represent this critical relationship, right? This is a cheque, but it is an artwork. It is an artwork by Marcel Duchamp, who paid basically his dentist bill with a personal cheque he designed by himself. It's very interesting because here you have basically both worlds in one cheque, right? The funny story, of course, is the 115 francs he had to pay in Paris before going back to New York, he did with his own painting, which is a cheque. Now, of course, is 100 you know, it's not 115 francs anymore, but maybe 1,000,000 or whatever. But it's interesting because you have both of these, you have both of the worlds of money, myth, and shake. The second I want to show you is this. This is Andreas Gursky, as some of you might know him. He's doing these wonderful photographs of stock markets. Now, the interesting thing here is the way he does his photographs of stock markets made him so rich, because these are photographs you can, you know, only buy for about $2 million or $3 million. But isn't it interesting that you have the content and the value as one? But you see that the representation of the power is not really the key thing. But what is the key image is showing a bit the phantasm of capitalism in a way which doesn't really work as it should, but comes to an end in its potential. The third picture you see is Andrea Fraser, who got famous for the fact that she said, we artists are part of the problem and not part of the solution. So we benefit from the financial bubble who give us the power and the intention and the money to pursue our purposes. And the last one is one we did ourselves as a foundation, as a company. And what you see here is an artist, Markus Geiger, who drew basically a house line with colors, but beyond ownership borders, right? So he doesn't concentrate on the ownership borders of the individual houses, but he takes a color set with an abstract painting over all the houses. Now, the color set are the colors of the euro, right? You see the 5, the 10, the 50, the 20, the 50, and the 100. And you know the colors of the euro, again, represent different phases of art history. So basically, he puts everything into one picture. And it is art done by a private person, by a private company, but not having it in place to demonstrate the own identity, but give identity to the neighborhood. So
Boris,
I'm just finished with one sentence.
Okay.
These were my final 4 pictures to show the complexity of money and the art world, give you some 4 hints on what kind of layers this has to be discussed. And I hope you enjoyed the speech. And now we have, I hope, a great discussion. Thank you very much.